Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Alessandra. I'm a master's student at a global campus of human rights in Italy, and I'm very, very happy to present today the last room session on COVID and its unequal impact. We will have 3 sessions. We will have three presentations. Every presentation will have 25 minutes time. We kindly ask the presenters to leave at least 5 minutes for question and answer. So maybe 20 minutes presentation and 5 minutes question and answer. And for the audience, we ask everyone to type the question in the Zoom chat, and I will read the questions out loud for the speakers. So that's all from my side, and we can start with the first presentation of today. I welcome on the stage Charlotte Bilo, Anna Carolina Machado, Pedro Arruda, Fabio Veras, and Marina Andrade from the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth, Brazil. And I will have a presentation with a title, Enhancing Coverage, Adequacy and Comprehensiveness of Social Assistance System in the Global South, COVID-19 as an Opportunity. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can I share my screen? It says it's not enabled.
Oh, just a minute, Charlotte, please.
Sure, no problem.
It's all right now.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the organizers of this conference and of this panel. I'm joining from Brasilia. My name is Charlotte Bilo, and I work as a researcher at the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth. I will be presenting today actually on behalf of a larger team of colleagues, and for today's presentations online with me are also my colleagues Fabio Veras, Marina Andrade, and Machado, and they have also helped to prepare this presentation. Maybe before I start, just for those of you who do not know the IPC-IG, the IPC-IG is a global research center focused on South-South dialogue on innovative development policies, and we work a lot in the area of social protection. The IPC-IG is based on a partnership between the government of Brazil and the UNDP, and we are hosted at the Institute for Applied Economic Research, IPEA, here in Brasilia, and some of our researchers are also IPEA researchers. So before I actually start presenting the findings of our research, just a few words for the sake of introduction into the topic. So the topic is about social protection and more specifically social assistance, but I'd like first to just give a short definition for what do we actually mean with social protection. So social protection can be defined as a set of policies and programs aimed at preventing and protecting all people against poverty, vulnerability, and social exclusion across the life course. And this includes a variety of policies, including social assistance, which will be the topic of today's presentation. And here we speak about, for example, cash transfer programs, in-kind transfers such as food baskets, but also school feeding programs, and many more. But social protection also includes social insurance policies, such as pensions or unemployment insurances, as well as labor market policies, such as wage subsidies, a quite common instrument that we've seen now in response to the COVID crisis. And why is social protection relevant and important in times of a crisis that we're facing right now, in terms of COVID-19? Well, you can see there are several reasons. You can see them on the slide. But basically, social protection is critical as it helps prevent rising poverty and food insecurity. But especially labor market policies can also help to prevent dismissal and guarantee a basic income. I think important also, it can contribute to maintain social cohesion and solidarity. Now, coming to what I will actually present today, so our research. Basically, I will be presenting the findings of a mapping that we have been conducting at the IPC-IG since the outbreak of the pandemic. And when I say mapping, I basically mean a spreadsheet in which we have been documenting and classifying all social protection measures taken in response to the COVID-19 crisis by national governments in the global south. And the mapping covers the three areas I just mentioned, so social assistance, social insurance, and labor market. And it provides quite detailed information about these interventions. So, for example, their coverage levels, so how many people do they actually cover, the benefit level, implementation details, financing details, but also which instruments were used, for example, to identify and register beneficiaries. And it is based on a review of information publicly available in several languages, and also on other already existing mappings of social protection responses, such as from colleagues from the World Bank or ILO. And important to highlight, the mapping will be made online, available in the form of a dashboard soon. On the socialprotection.org website, and I can share the link to the website in a bit through the chat. And this mapping and the dashboard is financed by UNDP and the German Development Corporation, GIZ. A lot of people have contributed to this mapping and are contributing to this mapping, who are important to acknowledge here. So you can see the IPC-IG team, but we also acknowledge, of course, the support and our partnership with UNICEF regional offices in the Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, South Asia, as well as our colleagues from UNDP Africa. And important also from the space team, we had support from Valentina Baca and Rodolfo Beasley, who have helped us on the conceptual framework and the selection of the indicators of the mapping itself. The findings of this mapping, actually the first findings we also presented about a month ago in an online conference hosted by socialprotection.org. So we can also share the links to the recordings in a bit, because there we presented the findings by region. So if you're interested, I invite you to have a look at those recordings. Now a bit on the framework of the mapping and the dimensions and a bit the topics I will cover today. So the mapping is meant to provide inputs in terms of the country's shock responsiveness of their social protection systems. So how did their social protection, how were their social protection systems used to provide assistance to those affected by the COVID-19 crisis? And you can see some of those key dimensions on the slide. So we talk about coverage a lot, meaning how many people are actually covered by those responses. We talk about adequacy, and here specifically focusing on cash transfers. So how much did the cash transfers around the world actually pay? And also we try to look at comprehensiveness. So who is covered by those, which population groups are covered by those responses, and who's maybe left behind? And also how comprehensive are those measures? So for example, if we think of children, children might have needs and might need services, social protection services that go beyond just cash transfer programs. So this is something we also try to document in our mappings. How well are those services or programs integrated to other responses? And then lastly, also in terms of delivery chain, so basically which type of instruments were used, for example, to register, to identify beneficiaries, but also to pay cash transfers, for example. So these are all the dimensions I will talk about throughout the presentation today, and our mapping provides more detailed information for the different countries in the global south. So now just starting with an overview of our findings. You can see here the distribution across the three social protection components I mentioned in the beginning. So social assistance in blue, social insurance in orange, and labor market in gray. And we can see that across all regions, social assistance policies were actually the most common ones. If we look at sub-Saharan Africa, we see that the share is actually even bigger than in the other regions. And we can see that, for example, in Latin America, in the East Asia Pacific, and in MENA, labor market measures, so the gray shares, were also quite common. And it's important to remember here that when we speak about measures or responses, this does not necessarily mean that those are new programs or new interventions. Often there were existing ones that were adapted in order to provide protection to those hit by the crisis. And we will speak a bit more about how this actually happened. Now, zooming into social assistance, which is the focus of today's presentation. You can see here, it might be a bit small, but the idea is to provide an idea of the different types of social assistance instruments. So you can see in dark blue, emergency cash transfers were the most common one across all regions. And this includes often emergency cash transfers to, for example, informal workers. Then in yellow, you see in-kind transfers, and this was often in the form of food, so food baskets for vulnerable families. And interestingly, I think for the Latin American region, so on the bottom in orange, you can also see school feeding programs were quite common. And again, here, this does not mean that they were new programs, but rather that they were adapted in response to the crisis. So for example, children could take the school meals home, or they were paid in cash instead. So there were several ways how those were adapted due to the school closures, of course. Now, looking at two important dimensions of our mappings and two important terms. So we speak in the field of shock responsive social protection, we speak a lot about horizontal and vertical expansion. And basically horizontal expansions means an expansion in terms of beneficiaries, so more people being covered through social protection responses. And this can either happen by adding more people to an existing program or by introducing a new program. And then vertical expansion, on the other hand, basically means an increase, for example, in benefits. So if we talk about cash transfers, a top up, but it can also mean an additional intervention to an already existing program. And you can see the figure for both types of expansion in this chart. And I think it's interesting to note maybe that for horizontal expansion, so coverage of beneficiaries, actually across all regions, it was more common that new programs, new emergency programs were introduced rather than adding new people or new households to existing ones. Now looking a bit at coverage and the benefits paid. And here we talk about the dimensions coverage and adequacy more specifically. In this graph, you can see a number of selected cash transfer programs across the different regions and the global south. Most of them were actually new interventions, as I just mentioned. And we chose to choose the 5 largest one for which data was available in the different regions. So in blue, you can see the estimated share of the population coverage. And in orange, you can see how much the benefit actually represents in terms of the monthly income or expenditure in the country, depending on which data was available and more recent. I think the graph is quite interesting because it gives an idea of actually the size of those cash transfer programs, but there are, of course, a couple of limitations and assumptions. I won't go much into detail, but one important one is that, of course, the frequency, so how often those benefits are paid, is important to keep in mind when comparing them, because as you can see in the brackets, they indicate the number of payments, and some of them were only one-time off payments. So this is important to keep in mind. But I think the graph provides some interesting insights. So we can see that in Latin America and Asia Pacific, the programs seem to cover more people of the total population. And well, for adequacy, so how much the they actually paid. Unfortunately, for Sub-Saharan Africa, we did not have this information available, but we did for some of the other countries in the other regions. And well, it's quite mixed, but Asia and Pacific, Latin America also seem to pay higher benefits. And again, the mapping itself provides more information about all these different programs, and actually many more. We just made a selection here. Then a bit in terms of comprehensiveness, so which were actually the groups covered by those programs that expanded horizontally. We can see that most were actually for vulnerable families, so 151. That was the number this group was targeted. It's important to keep in mind here that some programs can, of course, target more than one group. And we also see actually vulnerable individuals. So here we refer to categorical targeting of, for example, children, elderly, or disabled people was also quite common. And last but not least, informal workers. So the second row. And here this was mainly in the form of cash transfers, again, the emergency cash transfers. Now, so the fourth dimension that I mentioned at the beginning, delivery chain, and actually the instruments used, we can see here in terms of identification and registration of beneficiaries. In some countries, social registries were used where those were existent. I think many in the audience are probably well familiar with the Brazilian case. So in the case of Brazil, the Cadastro Único for the auxílio emergencial. But we also saw in Jordan, for example, the social registry was used, and also in other countries in Asia. In some countries, or for some programs, program databases were also used. So then often people or households that were on the waiting list of those programs were enrolled earlier than originally planned. So this happened, for example, in Egypt for the Takaful program. But actually one of the most, or the most common instrument used was digital windows or websites that were opened for people to register for the social protection programs. And this especially in those where the single registries did not only cover a small share of the population, and not those that were now affected by the crisis. In some countries, we also saw the use of mobile, so via SMS or WhatsApp, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, there's also a number of other mechanisms, of course, used. An example here is the use of village chiefs or local community workers who would then select or enlist the people, the most vulnerable households in their communities. In terms of payments, there were a few programs that, and here we focus, of course, only on cash transfer programs, so payment of cash. There were a few that used the traditional transfer to bank accounts where the beneficiaries had bank accounts, but this was not always the case. So we often saw also the use of either e-wallets or in Sub-Saharan Africa, actually also a lot of mobile money. So in Kenya, this was used for actually all responses. There were few cases where actually people had to collect the benefits in person, and this can, of course, also be explained by the risk of contagion. So this was tried to be avoided by the countries. Now I'm already coming to the end. Just a bit in terms of the lessons learned and looking ahead of this mapping and of the responses that we've seen so far. I would say in terms of opportunities, there has definitely been a shift of understanding. I would not call it a paradigm shift, but there has been a shift in terms of the importance of social protection. So social protection has now really has gained in importance, and in just people know about it, and people know that it's important, and that actually everyone should have or can have the need to rely on social protection measures. So not only the poorest, but actually people also in the formal work, in the formal sector. Then I think another opportunity is definitely the now registration and new databases that were created. So a lot of countries now have a lot of information about the beneficiaries, and this can, of course, be used in the future also for future social protection programs or other already existing programs. Then in terms of digital innovations, well, as I just mentioned, in a lot of countries, digital enrollment platforms were opened, and these, in theory at least, can also be used in the future for other social protection programs or even for other crises that might come. Lastly, also financial inclusion. So the opening in some countries of digital accounts could also enhance actually people's financial inclusion who were previously left out the banking sector, for example. But there are, of course, also a lot of challenges. I would say one refers to the political economy momentum or situation. So although social protection has gained in importance and recognition, we don't know yet what the next months will look like. So there might be kind of a push to the back to before situation, especially now, and this links to the second point, limited fiscal space. A lot of countries are, of course, facing fiscal challenges to maintain those programs or to even maintain the ones that those countries had before. And I think here it's definitely new responses will be needed. So some countries might need to increase their reliance on international support. Others will have to increase indebtedness, and this then maybe later through more progressive taxation in order to pay these debts. So there's, of course, this is, it's a topic in itself, I would say. But then another challenge is and has been still to reach people, those that are really the most difficult to reach. And this, of course, depends a lot on the country and on the context. But in the MENA region, for example, so Middle East and North Africa, where we have a high number of refugees and internally displaced persons, how to reach those people who are also now affected by the crisis, of course. In Latin America, we see the difficulty of reaching and providing support to indigenous populations and so on. And I think lastly, although there are, of course, a lot of gains and lessons learned in terms of the new digital innovations, new databases that were created, I think it still requires, of course, capacity, so human resources, human and financial resources to really make use of those and use them for the future. And this, would already be it. Thank you. We're happy. My colleagues are also online, so if you have any question, please feel free.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. If you have a question, you can type your question in the chat, and I can read them out loud for the speakers. Or if you want to pose your question by yourself, just let me know. Okay. I just see that the presenters. Oh, okay. So we have a few more minutes because then we have to move to the next one. Okay, we have one question. Thanks for the presentation, Charlotte. One question. What was the most surprising aspect that came out from your analysis?
Thank you, Michele, for the question. Well, good question. I think there are, as I said, the mapping. So I just summarized some of the key findings, and it's of course difficult to draw, let's say, lessons for the whole global South, because we covered more than 400 responses, I think, in our mapping. But I think definitely what I mentioned in terms of the new enrollment platforms that were actually put up in a relatively short time showed that actually countries are able to provide social protection to their populations in a relatively quickly manner. So a lot of the, let's say, the challenges that we and people working in the field of social protection were facing before actually seemed to, countries were able to overcome them relatively quickly. And I think the main reason there, of course, was, as I mentioned, that there was an acknowledgement of the importance of social protection. So I think there's a lot of change in terms of the political will. I would say that's, in general, probably one of the most, positive lessons from the mapping and the analysis of the responses.
Thank you very much. If there are no questions, then I think we have to move on the second presentation because the last presenters arrived. So initially I said we have 25 minutes each, then now we have to deal with 17, 18 minutes because otherwise the last presenters do not have time for their presentation. So thank you very much a lot. And I would present now Beatriz Fagionato Oliveira, Julia de Cresci Oliveira Matsuda from the State University of Londrina in Brazil. And they are having a presentation titled Afflicted, How the Coronavirus Pandemic Unveiled the Notorious Discrepancies in Brazil's Education System. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the organization of the conference for this opportunity and my fellow colleagues for your valuable contributions. I will start presenting the paper entitled Afflicted, How the Coronavirus Pandemic Unveiled the Discrepancies in the Brazilian Education System, which I co-wrote with my partner, Beatriz. We will try to keep our presentation short as asked by Alessandra because of the timeline. But if you have any questions in the end, we are more than happy to oblige. Well, the Brazilian public education system has long been in need of a reform. However, until the start of the coronavirus pandemic, it was easier for our society to look the other way. The lack of basic materials and infrastructure, teachers not getting paid enough, that is, when they do get paid, a program that isn't comprehensive or nearly sufficient to provide a solid basis for superior education are only the tip of an iceberg that sinks much deeper, as my colleague and I approach in our article. One of the most pressing and discussed issues regarding our topic is how this inequality affects college admissions and therefore one's entire future. Contrary to what happens in the United States and some of Europe, in Brazil it is usual for people to attend private schools throughout their entire childhood and then transition to a public college, as they are regarded as better and more competitive. That being said, although some schools have developed their own assessments, there is only one standardized national exam in the entire country, and college admissions are carried out solely based on test scores. There is no interview or curricular analysis whatsoever. That exam, called ENEM, is usually applied in October or November, and students use that grade to apply for college admissions in the following year. As I mentioned before, it is extremely competitive to get accepted into a public college, so those who can spend a lot of money trying to do so, including paying for private schools and tutors. Here we believe the problem becomes clear. Brazil doesn't offer a public basic education of quality, and at the same time doesn't offer enough spots for everyone at public colleges, which a system whose only choice is to attend a free university hardly have a chance of getting in. Because of that situation, it is common in our country to speak of meritocracy as if you could compare a child who barely has enough to eat and studies throughout the night with books found in the trash after working all day long to a child who has 5 different private tutors. COVID-19 has accentuated the talk of meritocracy, as some, including our government's administration, claim that with the pandemic, the conditions are now equal since everyone is studying from home. In our paper, me and Beatriz seek to dismantle that absurd narrative using statistics, government communications, and other official documents to show how more than ever the Indian education system is collapsing. Now Beatriz will finish presenting our conclusions and what we've discovered throughout our analysis and how our government responded to that situation. Thank you.
Well, in this topic, I'll talk about the shortcomings of government responses to the crisis and its consequences. So in March, the education networks started to adapt to the new context of the COVID-19 through the remote system, causing an uncertainty about when the classes will be in person again and the possibility of being a risk, increasing educational inequalities in Brazil. Many schools have declared early vacations and recess, not waiting for a government response. Therefore, the External Commission Assembly, formed by deputies, keeps up with the attitudes taken by the Ministry of Education and affirmed that the federal government did not adopt any responses until July to promote an inclusive education in the pandemic, neglecting the needed rural and indigenous populations. The report made by the Commission indicates that it was not considered the individualities of each population, including the technology required and the infrastructure problems like the transportation and the internet access. The exchange of ministers also demonstrate the unpreparedness and instability of the government, who did not organize any emergency politics. In the current government, Brazil had 3 ministers in only 18 months. The Ministry of Education should effectively coordinate the states and municipalities, since it is federal action the most important one. But that is not what's happening, and it was criticized by the Commission. So the standardized national exam called ENEM only changed the date due to pressure from other deputies and students who criticized the attitude taken by the ministry. Before that, they used the motto, "Brazil cannot stop," to justify maintaining the date of the exam for the end of 2020. So this motto neglects all the inequalities and discrepancies in all socioeconomic sectors of the country, reinforcing the declared disregard in the president's ideals. So that corroborates for the educational ministry to remain inert in the face of all these problems. But despite not taking more adequate measures, the Ministry of Education expanded the vacancies of the United Selection System, called SISU, allowing the distance learning modality, and the beneficiaries of the Student Financial Fund, FIES, may suspend the payment for the duration of the state of public calamity caused by COVID-19. In addition, more than 12,000 scholarships were extended for about 3 months to assist those who were conducting research in the interim of the pandemic. Also, the deadline for the application for the Student Financial Fund was prolonged so that candidates would not be harmed. A booklet in partnership with the Ministry of Health to guide the states and municipalities was prepared, hygiene resources and materials were offered, an increase in the budget to guarantee water schools, and also transfers of funds to federal public universities in order to ensure education for indigenous people, people with disabilities, and deaf people. In spite of these actions, the government did not consider the discrepancies above mentioned in Brazilian regions, making it impossible to achieve their whole efficacy. That goes against the principles and objectives of the ministry, putting the constitutional right to education at risk. Now I'm going to talk about the last topic covered by the paper, which is the practical consequence of the government's shortcomings. There is a concern that the remote classes will be considered equivalent to the present ones, showing a blackout in the educational system. This measure was authorized by the Ministry of Education, but is extremely harmful since Brazil is a country under development that faces several obstacles. One of these obstacles is the fact that the distribution of internet by income and region is in Brazil extremely uneven. Another factor is the need for electronic equipment such as smartphones and notebooks to carry out activities during the pandemic. Thus, the internet and electronic devices are crucial instruments for the remote and online classes. They end up harming a large portion of students who do not have access to these elements, especially low-income, rural, indigenous, and quilombola students. Another point to be considered is the provision of meals by public schools to students, which for many is the main meal of the day, leaving children and young people during the pandemic in a situation of food instability. In April, a law was passed that allows the redirection of foodstuffs from schools to the families of children and adolescents, but there was no resolution by the Ministry of Education on how this redirection should be done. In conclusion, we can infer that the COVID-19 pandemic only showed the federal government's unpreparedness in face of this emergency crisis, which do not take promptly effective and adequate measures, becoming inert and negligent. Besides, we can abstract that the pandemic also demonstrated social inequality in Brazil, exhibiting how it negatively affects the population, especially the poorest, who depend more on government measures and actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We have now 6-7 minutes for discussion, and for questions. Thank you very much. Let's see if there are some questions. No, I see nothing. So maybe I'll ask a question myself. What do you think that the government should do? What are the actions that should be done in order to overcome these problems? And do you think they can be feasible in in the next future, or you are rather pessimistic?
Well, the government was inert in the beginning and still is at a certain point. The name only changed this date because of pressure of the population, but well, other things can be done, but yet it is not effectively. So we have to wait to see if with these elections that's happening today will change something in the municipalities, and to see if these entities will do something, because the federal government is not doing enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we have one question. Hi, what do you think the situation will be after COVID-19? What lessons can be learned for the future? Thanks so much, from Elena.
Well, since Brazil is an underdeveloped country, I think they need to more internet access. Does not reach all the populations yet. So we have the rural populations and indigenous populations. There's still a really amount of people that is not with this access. So I think the internet will be more approachable for these populations after the pandemic, because all of the services, administration things are being online. I think this would be a future, I don't know, but after that, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have other questions to Beatriz? We have still a few minutes. Okay, so if there are no questions, we can go to the third presentation. Thank you very much, Beatriz, and thank you very much to Julia.
Oh, sorry,
the
Alessandra.
third presentation. Yeah.
We have a question from Charlotte. It's right now.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Okay, so how do you think the elections can change the situation?
Thank you, Charlotte, for
The
your
elections
question.
today.
Okay, thank you for your question. We believe that the current administration doesn't know exactly how to deal with the situation, because Bolsonaro, our current president, aside from not taking into consideration actually all the scientific opinions about the coronavirus pandemics as a whole, he is the one that mainly proclamates the speech about meritocracy. He's currently saying that the situation from everyone is now the same because everyone is studying from home, everyone has internet connection. He blatantly disregards that the research made in other previous governments, which says that the northern regions don't have as much Wi-Fi access as the southern regions, and all the discrepancies in the education system. That's something that he denies. So we believe that the current election, the following election actually, will change that, in the sense that we need a reform in the entire education system, not only due to the coronavirus pandemic, but the pandemic is only something that helped shine a light into the problem, because as we explained, the problem already existed, and it will continue to exist even after we have a vaccine and we can go back to in-person classes. The problem will not go away. So it's not something that we're just gonna solve by changing governments and changing administrations, but our current president doesn't help by denying the existence of the problem. So we believe that a change in the administration would be helpful, but we can't know for sure, because we may as well have another administration that denies the problem or doesn't take it as a priority. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. We can now move to the third topic. I welcome Marina Bonatto from the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná in Brazil. And she will speak about a new scenario and the previous challenges to achieve gender equality, the impact of COVID-19 in women's access to sexual and reproductive rights in Brazil. So the stage is yours. And you have 18, 19, so almost 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a master's student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná. And today, the main object of my presentation is the guarantee of sexual and reproductive rights of women, which is one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm bringing this object because the COVID-19 created a new scenario in Brazil and in the whole world, but many previous challenges, many previous problems continue. And one of them is the women's access to sexual and reproductive rights, especially in Brazil. So the guarantee of sexual and reproductive rights already was a big challenge to achieve gender equality in Brazil, and the COVID-19 pandemic showed off this problem and emphasized it. And for this reason, the article that I'm going to develop focuses on the domination of female bodies and women's access to reproductive rights. And it intends to address the issues of women's reproductive rights and the historic struggle for freedom of choice and autonomy, to demonstrate that, quite different from creating a new reality, the COVID-19 pandemic ends up bringing up about oppression and subordination always suffered by women, and aggravate them, and also served in Brazil as a subterfuge for women's right to be attacked. To achieve this goal, to achieve these rights and liberties, we must adopt an intersectional gender perspective, and I intend to use as main theorists the authors Angela Davis and Kimberly Crenshaw. And the article also aims to analyze the reproductive rights of women, as well as the right to choose from the perspective of Amartya Sen, development as freedom. And in the author's perspective, nothing would be as important to development as the adequate recognition of participation in political, economic, and social leadership of women. and consider freedom essential for the development process, it would be only achieved when the main sources of deprivation of freedom were eliminated. And in this sense, it intends to analyze the issue of guaranteeing reproductive rights of women as one of the necessary points for achieving freedom and consequently development. Another intention with this work is to analyze this whole context to show that the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be allowed to do even more harm to women than the tragedy itself, and states then, especially Brazil, must incorporate a gender perspective to combat this crisis, and not only a gender perspective, but an intersectional gender perspective that consider all of the different axes of power to which different women are subordinate. And by that, the Brazilian state has a duty to create safe, accessible, and efficient mechanisms so that all women can freely decide how they will exercise their reproductive capacity. And in addition to this duty, there's also the duty to inform and to educate everyone about health and sexual and reproductive rights. Such duties, they are not born with the COVID-19 pandemic, and quite the opposite. It is in the face of the constant violations of these duties and women's rights aggravated by the pandemic that's necessary and urgent, once again, to emphasize the losses arising from these violations and alert to the latent need to guarantee women's reproductive rights as human and fundamental rights so that they can freely decide on their life trajectory and how to exercise so many other rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do you have questions for Marina? We have, I think, we have 15 minutes for questions. So. Then maybe I ask you a question. When you say that the Brazilian government has like a duty to inform people, women of their reproductive right, do you have something like specific in mind, like actions, or like is it like still more general? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. First of all, it's important to educate children in the subject. It's important to have in schools the education about reproductive health, reproductive rights. And it's also important, and something that was highly impacted by this pandemic, the point that a lot of basic units of health in Brazil and in specific cities were closed or started to operate to act for the COVID-19. So in a lot of health units, there was no disponibility of mechanisms of contraception, for example. So I think to make disponible to all of women this mechanism, the contraceptive mechanism, and the duty of giving education for the children in this subject, they are the most important things right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. We have another question from Vanya. She asks, do we have any data about it? Thank you.
Yes. In Brazil, many journals, many journalists collected data about it in different cities. And the data shows up that during the COVID-19 pandemic, many basic units of health were closed or started working to combat the COVID-19. So many women could not have the access to contraception in these health units. And specifically talking about public health, many women just can access this contraception in these basic units of health, in this public health system. So these women were highly affected by it. And there is also information that in many cities in Brazil, in specific hospitals and specific units of health, there was a lack of contraceptions and and a lack of products, a lack of contraception for these women. So there is data that confirms that this sector was highly impacted by the COVID-19. And thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I have another question. Do you think that the elections from today in Brazil can affect somehow also like this? This topic. Are you optimistic about it? Do you think that something can change?
Yes, I think it can really impact. Some of the public health, it's a competence of the federal government. So just in a few years, we're going to try to change this thing. But today, with the municipal elections that we are having in Brazil, it can have some changes because some of the aspects of the public health are competence of the municipality. So I think one thing that can change is that the government can give much more of education, can try to bring this up to schools. And this is a point that was made politically, a political point in Brazil, because sexual and reproductive education in Brazil became a question of, they call ideology of a gender. So they see as left thing. So it became a political problem, but it is not. It's part of the basic education of children and for development of a person. And I think government in all of instance of power can work in this sense and can work in the public health to make disponible to women all of these they need to guarantee their health, their rights, and their liberties. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. We have a question from Michela. Is this a general problem or is it specifically located in some particular areas of Brazil? Thank you for the presentation, Marina.
Thank you. It is a worldwide problem, we can say. And as I bring Amartya Sen as one of the authors, when he write about it like years ago in the beginning of the 21st century, it was already a problem, the reproductive rights of women and the question of women that don't have the right to choose because they don't have how to choose. It's an imposition in their lives. And this was a problem already brought by the author years ago. And it's a general problem, but it is more impacting. It's of major impact in specific areas, as in Brazil, for example, in Latin America, where the inequality is huge and much bigger than in other countries, for example. And in Brazil, we already have inequalities within states. So we have states that are more unequal than others. So this is really a related thing, because these rights, they are, the guarantee of these rights of women, they depend on the guarantee of equality between women and men, but they also depend on a question of equality between all of women, because of women of all classes, because women that have the money to buy this contraception or to have access to hospitals and private, the private health, cannot be more protective or cannot have more right to choose more liberty than women that don't have money for that depend on the public health. So it is a general problem. If we consider that the inequality between men and women is a general problem, it's still a worldwide problem, but it's also specific. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. We do have a few more minutes. Do you have other questions? If you have questions, and maybe this question arrived to you, later, we also have a website and email, which is like indicated in the Zoom chat. You can always write your questions and send them to us. I see no questions, so maybe I would then just go to the next presentation. I thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. And now I would present Juliana Bertholdi and Gustavo Martinelli Tanganelli Gazzotto from the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, Brazil. They will talk about the systemic importance of female consumer protection in the post-COVID scenario. You have roughly 20 minutes, and we kindly ask you to maybe make 15 minutes presentation and then 5 minutes for question and answer. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, my fellow colleagues. It is an honor. It is a great pleasure to be here with you on this Sunday, on this day of election. Indeed, and in fact, I'm alone here right now, not with my partner, Juliana Bertholdi, because she's she's a lawyer, and she is right now doing her duty as on the election day. So maybe she will arrive during my presentation to help me answering the following questions. So right now I'll share my screen. I have a little presentation here. Hope you all can see it. The title of our article is The Systemic Importance of Female Consumer Protection in the Post-COVID Scenario. We have a great objective here, that is to study the phenomenon of female over-indebtedness in the post-COVID-19 scenario. Our research question was, how does the COVID-19 pandemic, that pandemic impacts and have its economic consequence on women overall, and how it affects social development here in Brazil. I believe there is a great relevance here, because we need to raise awareness not only to female protection, but also to over-indebtedness for the whole population in Brazil. We have a great issue here of over-indebtedness. So we need to, before going to the key points, we need to get some essential data about Brazilian women. Forgive my English. I need to say it because it's been a while since my last presentation in English. I was just a teenager actually. So here we have some interesting data. 62% of over-indebted individuals who seek debt renegotiations are women. So people that goes to the credit market to go to banks and ask for renegotiation to another opportunity of financial stability are on the majority are women. Most women tend to spend their income on family consumption. So once they are over indebtedness, we believe that it is because overconsumption or because desires for things, material things. It is not. Women spend their income overall with food to their children, with education, with cultural experience for their children. So that is extremely important. Furthermore, we have that women represent 45% of formal labor force in Brazil. So it's almost half of formal labor force. It is increasing each year a little bit more. And I believe in a few years, women will be most of labor force in Brazil. Some more data, a few more data. It is important to understand that 59% of Brazilian unemployment rate are women. Women represent most of informal jobs, of sub-employment jobs. And we need also to understand some we need to analyze with the intersectional view. Also, we need to understand that Black women's 47% of Black women's income depends nowadays on informal work. That is almost half of women's, Black women's, they are working on informal market. At least women are breadwinners. That means they are the lead income of their families. Nowadays, it represents 48.2 Brazilian homes. Overall, we need to understand that Brazilian women are extremely important for the economy as a whole, for the Brazilian economy as a whole. However, and despite that, no public policy has been developed at national level to solve growing indebtedness. On the contrary, the only measure to mitigate the social economic effects of the coronavirus was limited to allocate 600 reais, almost $100, to those who do not have formal employment, who do not receive too much or half of Brazilian minimum wage income per capita. That is the so-called Corona voucher that we know. We don't have any policy, so despite that fact, we also need to prepare for the endangered scenario that will attack women financial independence, I believe, in the next months. Because first of all, the credit offer in the Brazilian credit offer has increased 600% in the last 10 years. That is great offer. People are asked to sign contracts, financial contracts, credit contracts, and they don't look forward. They don't look the risks that it can be involved. On the second point, people's demand keep on growing on the coronavirus scenario without any extra income. On the contrary, the rule is to mitigate some income, so we don't have how to maintain or how to balance the level of growing demand and not growing income. The third point that is important to understand how the coronavirus will impact women's financial independence is to understand that 60% of Brazilian families are already over indebted. So we are already facing a scenario of over indebted. We already need some policy, some law, some state law to change that reality, and we are not doing it. And last but not least, again, 66% of indebted. Sorry.
Can I stop you? Sorry, I don't know if it's just my problem or what. I can only see the first like image on the screen on the PowerPoint.
You're not seeing the next ones. You're seeing just the title.
No. Yeah. But maybe it's just me. I don't know. No. Sorry. Okay. No. Now it goes. Now it goes. Okay. But maybe it was just here. Ah. Okay. Okay. Now they're saying in the chat. Same here. Okay. Now.
Well,
I think maybe now it's resolved. Okay. Right. Now I think it's resolved.
All right.
Perfect. Okay. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, you can go. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So we have a scenario of, I believe we have a scenario of endanger of women's financial independence, and we already have a possible solution, but that is not a miracle. We already have in course the bill number 3115 of 2015, that is possibly a vaccine for women over indebtedness. I believe that is a vaccine for women for over indebtedness overall, not just for women. That state law, that bill, that draft, they are designed on 4 branches. We can say that. First of all, the liability for financial firms. That means that banks will be accountable for over indebtedness contracts if they do the contract clauses, if they are not with good faith or with vices of any nature, they will be civil accountable for that. The second branch, that is the repatriation branch. We need to understand and we need to improve our policies to renegotiation over indebtedness before any lawsuit, and that draft, that state bill sees that and attacks that. We need to educate and prevent, not only after we have a over indebtedness scenario, we have to prevent it. So that must be public policies, not only in school, but in the public life overall, that inform the risks involved on credit contracts, as we can see an increased offer for credit in Brazil. And the fourth branch is to know that we already have that alternative. That is, we don't have to begin we don't have to start drawing it. We don't have to start thinking about it. It is already on course. It is already in discussion since 2015. So we already have that scenario. I believe that that is it. That is just an overall looking. I'm very happy to have Juliana Bertholdi now here. She will help me a lot. She is a great researcher, and she did this incredible research with me. So that's it. Thank you a lot. It is an honor to be here.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize that I'm this late. I'm actually an electoral lawyer here in Brazil, so I had to work today. We are having our elections today, so I'm very sorry that I'm this late. I want to apologize to my colleagues that I couldn't hear their presentation. For sure, Dr. Alessandra, maybe later I could get the information with you. I don't know if we have researchers taking notes at the panels, but I just wanted to say that I'm very sorry that I couldn't be here earlier. So our main conclusions are very simple. Women are economic structures in Brazil, and by that, they are responsible for most half of Brazilian families and almost 70% of the single parent families. By that, women as economic agents here in Brazil should be more protected when we are dealing with over-indebtedness. That is our main concern. That if we don't take care of these women and if we don't take more action to prohibit the predatory practice of credit companies in Brazil, we shouldn't be able to get back on our feet when we are discussing our economy. By that, we are especially worried and concerned with the law project 3515 from 2015. It's not a very new project, but it's a very important law project to be approved, because the main concern in this project is to protect the Brazilian people from the over-indebtedness. If we don't take action to protect these women, especially, not only the whole population, but the women especially, as they are responsible for most of the single-parented families, we should face a lot of consequences here in Brazil. So our main concern is to defend that this project law should be approved and as soon as possible, because this is an urgency measure that we should take during the pandemic of COVID-19 to protect our women, and by that, protect Brazilian families and also protect our children. So that's our main concern. We are actually advocating for this project law, and we hope that we can get as much feedback as you can give us. And again, I'm very sorry I'm this late, and I'm very thankful that you are hearing me, although I was this late. I'm very, very sorry. I didn't mean to be disrespectful at all. So thank you very much for hearing us, and I'm sure you will have a lot of feedback to give to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. The presentation was very, very interesting. I didn't know all these things about Brazil and Brazilian women. I'm shocked that like Brazilian women like count so much actually in the, in the financial wallet of the family. I mean, it's wow. I see a question here from Michela. Michele says, thank you very much for the super interesting presentation. I agree. 60% of Brazilian families are indebted. What is the main cause for this amount of debt?
I believe we have at least two big causes. The first one is the informal force of women. Actually, they earn less income. So it is a very simple equation. They have demand, families have demand, and they don't earn as much as men. And the second cause, I believe, it is the over offer of credit in Brazil. So we have marketing and propaganda about financing, about credit market. So we have this impulse to make a loan, and they don't have any income to pay it after all.
I would also add the fact that here in Brazil, we have a lot of single-parented families. So the women are very much, I don't know how to say it. They are very vulnerable to the credit offers because they have to take care of their children. They're alone. They are the only ones responsible for the family. So they are very, very vulnerable to this very predatory market that is credit in Brazil. Just to tell you, I used to work in a building that they had a credit company right next door to me, and I could hear them talking, mostly with women and with elderly people. So it was very scary to hear what they were saying, because they actually lie to people when they are selling the credit. They say it's very cheap and they would be okay to pay it, but people tend to get more credit to pay the credit they got before, and it's a snowball. And as we don't have this law to actually make this market less predatory, women are very, very much vulnerable. So it's a very important issue here in Brazil and very much forgotten in the academic area. So that's why we are especially worried.
We have another question, always from Michele. Isn't this extremely risky, even for the credit company? Example, subprime crisis in 2009.
It is very risky, but it's still very profitable. That's why they keep doing it. So they make a lot of money, Michela, with this practice. That's why they don't stop it. Because most people here in Brazil try to pay their credit. We don't have the bubbles they had, for example, in American market in 2011, for example. So most people here in Brazil really try to pay the credit. So it's risky, but still very profitable.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that, although it's very risky, they know the risk. So differently from the subprime crisis, that they didn't know how risky it was, they actually know it. So they make the price of credit, and the contracts are already knowing the risks involved.
Yeah, it's very, very expensive here in Brazil to get credit because it's risky. So they put the risk on the business. That's why they keep doing it. So it's crazy, and it's very, very weird that it's not regulated yet, at least not as it should be in our view.
Thank you very much for all of you. We have the last minute, so if someone has some question, like, that's the moment, because then we have to conclude our session, because in 10 minutes there will be like the last final Zoom session of the conference. So I think there is no more question. Well, if I have time, I would ask you a very quick question. Could you maybe elaborate more on this project law that you that you explained at the very end?
Okay, so this law project...
1 minute, sorry.
Okay, I'll try to make it fast. So this law project focuses on an update on our consumers code that will protect these consumers of credit. So they try to make this market more regulated and less predatory. As, for example, making it mandatory for the companies to explain how the credit works and to prove that the person that got that credit knew how it worked. So it has many measures of prevention, repression, and also the treatment of over-indebtedness, so that people that are in this situation can get back on their feet. They are not completely abandoned by the state. So it's a mix of changes at our consumers code.
Thank you very much. That was very fast. It was perfect. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry for all the presentations, because they were all very interesting, but we have like this schedule and like I cannot like go exceed. That was very, very interesting. I'm sorry we have to finish here, but like stay connected, because in 10 minutes there will be like the closing session. I thank you very much all that you have been like with us for this 1 hour and a half. That was amazing for me. I hope it was also for you. And thank you very much.